I stood at the back of the church, hidden in the shadow of the tall wooden doors, my heart pounding louder than the music playing from the organ. Every note seemed to mock me, every whisper from the pews a reminder that I didn't belong there anymore. At the altar, standing in the soft glow of stained glass light, was the man I once believed I would spend the rest of my life with. Ethan. The man who promised me forever, now dressed in a black suit. Waiting with a smile on his face for another woman. I wanted to turn away. I wanted to close my eyes and pretend this wasn't happening. But my feet refused to move. My chest ached, as though someone had carved out the very air inside me. Around me, people noticed. I saw the smirks, the raised eyebrows, the not-so-quiet whispers. They said things like, "She shouldn't be here, and doesn't she know it's over?" But the sharpest blow came from his family. His mother's cold voice cut through the hum of conversation like a blade. "Leave. You don't belong in this church," her words echoed inside me, reminding me of every rejection, every moment I was told I was not good enough for their world. My hands trembled, but I refused to move. Something in me, something deeper than heartbreak, held me in place. It wasn't love anymore. It wasn't desperation either. It was something else. A quiet, burning fire that told me to wait. The ceremony began. Clara, the woman who had taken my place, walked down the aisle in her perfect white gown. The guests turned to admire her, but I kept my eyes on Ethan. I studied the way his jaw tightened, the way he avoided looking toward the back of the church, as if pretending I wasn't there would erase the truth of what he had done. I was about to leave. My legs finally began to move, carrying me toward the exit. My throat was tight, and for a brief moment, I wondered if perhaps this was all I was meant to be. A forgotten name, a shadow, erased from his story. But then, as I reached for the heavy doors, I heard it. The priest cleared his throat, his voice breaking through the silence of the church. "Before we proceed," he said slowly, his eyes scanning the crowd, "I need to call upon someone important." Every head in the room turned, every whisper stopped, and then he said it, my name. It rang out, loud, clear, undeniable. The shock that rippled through the church was almost tangible. I could see Clara's smile falter, Ethan's eyes widen, and his mother's face pale. The air grew thick, charged with something no one could quite understand yet. But I knew. Deep inside, I knew this was the moment everything would change. And as I turned back toward that aisle, standing taller than I had in weeks, I whispered to myself, "Now, it's my turn." My name is Sophia, and I never believed I'd be the kind of woman to stand in the shadows of her own heartbreak. I always thought life was supposed to reward hard work, kindness, and patience. That if you gave the world your best, it would return something good in time. That was what I had been taught since childhood, and for most of my life, I clung to that belief like a lifeline. I grew up in a small town, in a house that creaked with every step but was filled with laughter and warmth. My father was a carpenter, a man whose rough hands could build beauty out of nothing but wood and nails. My mother was a schoolteacher, patient and steady, who taught me that the greatest strength a person could have was compassion. We didn't have much, but what we had was enough. They raised me with strong values, honesty, perseverance, and faith in myself, even when life felt uncertain. From the time I was a little girl, I dreamed of becoming an architect. I would sit for hours with a notebook, sketching houses, bridges, and even cities that existed only in my imagination. To me, architecture wasn't just about buildings. It was about creating spaces where people could live, love, and feel safe. My parents encouraged me, even though they couldn't afford much. My father used to say, "Sophia, you'll build something greater than I ever could." And I believed him. When I grew older, I chased that dream with everything I had. I worked late nights, took jobs that barely paid the bills, and studied harder than anyone else around me. Every step forward felt like a victory, a way of proving that no matter where I started, I could create a better life. And slowly, piece by piece, I did. But for all my ambition and determination, there was another side to me. I was loyal, sometimes to a fault. I forgave easily, even when I shouldn't have. I trusted people too quickly, thinking they carried the same values I did. People often underestimated me because I was quiet, because I preferred to listen rather than speak. They mistook gentleness for weakness, and for a long time, I let them. Looking back now, I realize that those qualities were both my greatest strength and my deepest vulnerability. Because it was that same loyalty, that same forgiving heart, that led me straight into the arms of the man who would nearly destroy me. At the time, I thought I had found everything I had ever wanted: love, companionship, and a future I could finally build outside of blueprints and sketches. But if only I had seen the warning signs sooner, I wouldn't have walked into the trap that almost destroyed me. And yet, maybe that was the lesson I was meant to learn, that sometimes the foundations you trust the most are the ones that collapse beneath you. Life has a strange way of giving you everything you've ever asked for, just to see what you'll do with it. For me, those years felt like a dream I didn't want to wake up from. After years of late nights and endless effort, I finally landed my first job at a respected design firm. It wasn't glamorous at the start, but it was mine. My sketches no longer sat in dusty notebooks. They were being turned into real projects, real structures, real futures. I still remember the day I won my first big client. It was a small restaurant, nothing fancy. But when the owners handed me the contract, I felt a rush of pride that no award could ever replace. For the first time, I believed I wasn't just chasing my dream anymore. I was living it. It was during that time that I met Ethan. He was everything I thought I wanted in a man. Charming, ambitious, confident in ways that made me feel safe and excited at the same time. We crossed paths at a networking event, and while I was fumbling with my business cards, he walked up with the kind of smile that made everyone else fade into the background. We talked that night for hours, about everything from career goals to favorite books, as though we had known each other for years. Our romance was fast, almost too fast, but in those moments, I didn't question it. Ethan took me to places I had only seen in magazines, dinners under city lights, long drives where the world felt like it belonged only to us, promises whispered under the stars that felt too sweet to doubt. He had a way of making me believe that the future wasn't just bright, it was certain. His family welcomed me at first. His mother offered me tea the first time I visited their home. His sister laughed at my jokes, and for a brief moment, I felt like I had stepped into a family that could someday be my own. We spent weekends together, holidays together, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to relax. I believed I had found not just love, but belonging. The proposal came quietly, without any grand gestures. We were standing in the half-renovated house I had been dreaming of making into a home. The paint was still drying on the walls. Dust lingered in the air. But Ethan knelt on one knee and held out a ring. It wasn't about the diamond or the moment. It was about the promise. A simple promise that I thought would last a lifetime. I said yes without hesitation. At that time, everything in my life felt aligned. My career was blooming, my heart was full, and I could see a future laid out before me as clearly as any blueprint I had ever drawn. I thought I was walking into a forever. but Forever had other plans. It didn't happen all at once. The change was slow, subtle, almost unnoticeable at first. But looking back, the signs were there, and each one was a warning I chose to ignore. Ethan's family, the same people who had once smiled at me and welcomed me into their home, began to show cracks in their kindness. It started with Margaret, his mother. Her words were always polite on the surface, but beneath them hid sharp edges. She would compliment my dress, then add how unusual it must feel for me to wear something so fine. She would smile at my work stories, then remind me that architects rarely earn what businessmen like Ethan did. And then one evening, when she thought I was out of earshot, I heard her whisper to a friend, "She's not our kind. Ethan deserves someone who matches his world." Those words stayed with me, echoing long after they were spoken. His sister Lydia was different. Her disdain wasn't hidden in careful remarks. It was loud, cruel, and deliberate. She told anyone who would listen that I was only after Ethan's money, that I had seen an opportunity and latched onto it. At first, I brushed it off as jealousy or spite. But when I noticed people looking at me differently, when friends began asking cautious questions about whether Ethan supported me more than I admitted, I realized her lies were spreading faster than I could stop them. Ethan, once attentive and warm, began to slip away from me. At first, it was small things, canceling a dinner here, rescheduling a weekend there. But soon, his excuses grew longer, his calls fewer, his voice colder. Whenever I asked what was wrong, he brushed me off with the same words, "Just busy." But I knew better. I started noticing Lydia more often, always lingering around Ethan's office, her whispers with Margaret stopping abruptly whenever I entered the room. There was a secrecy in the air. A sense of being shut out of something I was supposed to be part of. Ethan would avoid my eyes when I questioned him, and though he denied it, I could feel the distance growing like a wall between us. One night, everything changed. I was sitting beside him when his phone buzzed. The message flashed across the screen before he could snatch it away. It was from Lydia. "Don't worry," it read. "She won't be a problem much longer." The room around me blurred. My hands turned cold. I looked at Ethan, searching for answers, but his expression only confirmed what I already feared. There was something happening behind my back, something darker than I had imagined. In that moment, I felt the first crack in the foundation of the life I had built. And though I didn't know it yet, that single text was the beginning of everything unraveling. That was when my world began to shatter. The distance between Ethan and me turned into a chasm I could no longer ignore. The man we once promised me forever became a stranger, almost overnight. His tone grew sharp, his eyes impatient, his words laced with blame for things I hadn't done. If he came home late, it was somehow my fault for distracting him. If he forgot an appointment, he claimed I never reminded him. Every conversation ended with me questioning myself, as though I had somehow become the problem. But it wasn't just within the walls of our relationship. Outside, the whispers began to spread, seated carefully by his family. I heard them in grocery aisles, at networking events, even among people I thought were my friends. They said I had cheated on Ethan, that I was unstable, that my so-called love was nothing more than an obsession. Margaret and Lydia spun the story so convincingly that people began to believe it. My character, my reputation, the very things I had built my life upon, were being dismantled piece by piece, and I could do nothing to stop it. Then came the cruelest betrayal of all. Wedding invitations began circulating in our community. People congratulated me, assuming I was the bride. But when I asked about my own invitation, none ever arrived. Confused and desperate, I went to Ethan. I needed answers, needed to hear from his own mouth that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But he didn't soften. He didn't reach for me, or reassure me, or even hesitate. He looked at me as though I were nothing more than a nuisance, and with a coldness I had never seen in him before, he said, "You were never the one. Leave with your dignity." Those words cut deeper than any lie his family had spread. For the first time, I understood. They had not only turned him against me, they had erased me completely, and he was willing to let them. It didn't take long for me to discover the truth. Lydia, with her constant whispers and schemes, had introduced Ethan to someone new. Clara, a woman polished, wealthy, and elegant in ways I had never been. She came from a family with influence, the kind of connections Margaret had always wanted for her son. Clara didn't have to fight for her place in his world. She was handed it, gift-wrapped and celebrated, while I was discarded like a mistake that needed to be corrected. I saw them together once, laughing in a cafe that Ethan and I used to visit. He looked at her with the same adoration he once reserved for me. That was the moment I realized I hadn't just been replaced. I had been rewritten, as though my chapter in his life had never existed at all. It was like I'd been erased from his life, like I never mattered. But I wasn't about to disappear quietly. The day the official wedding announcement was published, my world shattered completely. I had prepared myself for whispers, for rumors, even for betrayal. But nothing could have braced me for the sight of Ethan's smiling face printed beside Clara's, their engagement announced to the entire community as though I had never existed. My hands shook as I held the newspaper. Their story was written like a fairy tale, a perfect couple uniting two powerful families. A wedding to celebrate wealth and love. But between the lines, all I could see was the truth. My name erased, my place stolen, my heart discarded like it had never mattered. In the days that followed, I fell into a darkness I had never known before. I stopped working. I stopped answering calls. I wandered my home in silence, replaying every memory, every promise, every lie. Despair wrapped itself around me like a second skin. I was humiliated, broken. And for the first time in my life, I felt powerless. The realization was crushing, but it was also liberating. I wasn't losing my mind. I wasn't unstable, as they had claimed. I had been betrayed, manipulated, and cast aside. And that was when my despair turned into resolve. They thought they could humiliate me in front of the world. They thought they could erase me from the story. But they forgot one thing. I was not finished. If they wanted a spectacle, then a spectacle they would have. And when the world looked at them, it wouldn't be with admiration. It would be with shame. I whispered to myself, steady and certain, and it would all begin on their wedding day. I knew there was no turning back the moment I made the decision. Revenge is not a feeling, it's a plan. And plans require patience, precision, and a clear head. I spent nights sketching maps in my notebook, not of buildings, but of people. Who trusted whom, who held power, who could be persuaded, and where the weak points lay. This was no impulsive act. It was a careful architecture of consequence. First, I needed the truth. I began with research, the slow and methodical kind that uncovers what people try to hide. I dug into Clara's past the way I used to study old blueprints, line by line, hole by hole. What looked like a flawless life had thin joints and cracks. I found a string of stories that didn't match the polished image she presented. Debts quietly settled, whispers of affairs, a hastily signed name on documents that suggested she'd been married before and perhaps in another country still was. Each discovery felt like a brick I could use to build my case. Next, I needed allies. One person alone can be loud, but a group can be deafening. I reached out to Daniel, Ethan's cousin, the one everyone pretended not to notice. He had been pushed to the margins of that family for years and harbored his own resentment. At first, he was skeptical. Who wouldn't be? But when I showed him what I had found, his posture changed. He remembered slights I didn't even know existed. And he agreed to help, not out of loyalty to me, but out of a shared desire to right old wrongs. With Daniel, I gained access to details and doors that were otherwise closed. Then came the setup. I couldn't simply storm the wedding with accusations. That would have made me look unstable, predictable, and desperate. I needed evidence that would hold up in a room full of people and cameras. Quietly, through legal channels and whispers, I secured copies of documents that showed Clara's previous marriage in another country was not dissolved. I arranged for these papers to be in the hands of someone impartial, someone whose voice would carry weight in that church. The priest, a man I had observed to be careful and fair, agreed to review them once I presented them properly. His cooperation was crucial. He could not be dismissed as my ally without damaging his own credibility. I also constructed a social trap. Weddings draw attention. They attract gossip and reporters, investors, and curiosity. I made calls, sent discreet invitations, and placed hints that people in power might want to attend. Business associates who had once courted Ethan's favor were now curious about the union. Reporters were tempted by the possibility of a high society wedding story. I knew that if the right faces were in the crowd, people who could cut ties and make judgments, then the fallout would extend beyond hurt feelings into real consequences. Timing was everything. Every reveal had to happen at the precise moment for maximum effect, when silence would turn into gasp, when whispers would become headlines. I rehearsed the sequence in my mind until it was as precise as a construction plan. The priest's pause, the documents presented, the reporter's cameras catching the reaction. I had one chance. If I failed, I would be the villain forever. But if I succeeded, they would never recover the comfortable facades they'd built. The day of the wedding arrived, and I walked into the church as quietly as a shadow. The room glittered with chandeliers and silks, every corner polished to perfection, as if wealth itself had been draped over the walls. Guests turned their heads when they saw me, some whispering, others sneering. To them, I was nothing more than an uninvited ghost clinging to the past. Their eyes mocked me, their smirks reminding me of the place they believed I had lost. Margaret's voice cut through the hushed conversations, sharp and deliberate, so I could hear every word. She still doesn't understand. She's not wanted here. Her tone carried triumph, the kind that comes from believing the battle has already been won. I lowered my gaze, not because I felt defeated. The ceremony began, the music swelling, Clara radiant in her gown as she approached the altar. Ethan standing beside her with an air of pride. For a moment, I allowed myself to remember what it had felt like to believe I belonged there. But the past was behind me, and the future was about to be rewritten. Just as I turned to leave, the priest's voice rang out, firm and commanding. "Sophia." My name echoed against the stone walls, and the entire congregation froze. Gasps rippled across the pews, heads turned, eyes widened, and for the first time that day, I was no longer invisible. The priest stepped forward, holding papers in his hand. His expression was solemn, but his tone carried authority. He began to read aloud, unveiling documents that none of them expected to hear in that sacred space. Clara's marriage certificate from years before, still legally binding, never dissolved. A silence heavier than stone fell over the church. Clara's face drained of color. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Ethan's confident posture crumbled, his hand slipping from hers as horror spread across his features. Whispers exploded among the guests, the scandal unraveling in real time before their eyes. But I was not finished. While the shock still lingered, I stepped forward, holding another set of evidence. In my hands were photographs, clear, undeniable images of Lydia in the company of Ethan's business rival. Their closeness leaving no room for innocent explanation. The pictures told a story of betrayal deeper than anyone could deny. I turned them toward the crowd. Gasps became murmurs. Murmurs grew into sharp discussions. Business associates, seated in the front rows, exchanged wary looks. Investors, once so eager to tie their fortunes to Ethan's rising star, began to stand, some quietly leaving, others speaking in hushed but urgent tones. The empire he had built on ambition and appearances crumbled before my eyes, each foundation stone shattered by truth. Chaos erupted. Clara sobbed. Margaret shouted in defense. Lydia's face twisted in fear, and Ethan tried desperately to regain control. Voices overlapped, chairs scraped, and the sound of something breaking, glass, or perhaps the illusion of perfection, echoed through the hall. And as I stood there, watching the world they had used to destroy me collapse around them, one thought cut through the noise. It was chaos, screams, and broken glass, but it was only the beginning. Clara was the first to break. Her perfectly painted face, once glowing with triumph, now contorted with fury and humiliation. She ripped the veil from her head and hurled it to the ground, her heels clattering against the stone aisle as she stormed out of the church. Guests leaned back in their pews to avoid her furious path, but no one dared to follow. For all her polished elegance, Clara had been reduced to nothing more than a scandal in silk. Margaret's voice rose, shrill and panicked, trying to salvage dignity where none remained. "This is a lie! All of it! A vicious setup!" she cried, clutching at her pearls as if they could hold her collapsing world together. But before she could say another word, her body swayed. Gasps filled the church as Margaret fainted. Her collapse punctuated by the sharp crack of her jewelry against the marble floor. A flurry of hands rushed to her aid, but I did not move. Lydia, pale but defiant, stepped forward, her voice trembling, yet stubborn. "This isn't true! Those documents are forged! Sophia is just bitter and jealous!" She tried to force strength into her words, but her desperation betrayed her. One of Ethan's business partners rose from his seat, holding up his phone. On the screen were messages between Lydia and the rival businessman, messages that matched perfectly with the photographs I had revealed. Her lies disintegrated under the weight of her own words. The guests murmured louder, judgment spreading like wildfire. Lydia's shoulders slumped. Her facade crumbled in real time. And then, all eyes turned to Ethan. His once proud figure stood hollow before me, stripped of his bride, his family's approval, and his dignity. His gaze searched mine, pleading, broken. "Sophia, please, I was wrong. I should have chosen you. I see that now. Forgive me." His voice cracked, the arrogance gone, replaced by the fragile sound of a man watching his empire collapse. For a moment, the silence between us was deafening. Then I stepped forward, the final piece of my plan, ready to strike. From my bag, I pulled out the neatly bound set of documents Daniel had helped me secure. Legal papers that bore Ethan's signature and the company seal. I raised them high enough for everyone to see, my voice calm but resolute. You didn't just lose your bride today, Ethan. You lost everything you built on lies. These documents prove what you've tried to hide, that I am the rightful co-owner of your company. From this day forward, every decision, every deal, every ounce of power you thought you had belongs to me as well. The church erupted in an uproar. Gasps, whispers, even laughter filled the sacred space. Investors exchanged knowing glances, some smirking at Ethan's downfall. Ethan's face drained of color as the reality sank in. He was no longer just a man disgraced at the altar. He was a man undone in every corner of his life. I turned, my steps steady, the sound of my heels echoing against the stone as I walked toward the doors. Behind me, the church buzzed with scandal, with disbelief, with the fall of a man who thought he could erase me. I didn't need to look back. When the dust settled and the chaos of that wedding became nothing more than a memory whispered behind closed doors, I finally understood something I had been too blinded by pain to see. Revenge wasn't about stealing Ethan back. It was never about him at all. It was about reclaiming what they thought they had stripped from me. My dignity, my voice, my worth. The weeks that followed were strangely quiet. The same people who once mocked me in whispers now watched me with a mix of awe and wariness. Some offered apologies, others avoided me altogether. But I didn't waste time on their opinions. My focus shifted inward, toward the life I had always dreamed of, but had put aside for love that was never real. I threw myself back into my work, pouring my energy into projects that reminded me why I had chosen architecture in the first place. Designs that spoke of strength, of endurance, of beauty rising out of broken foundations. Woo. That was a sentence. Clients came in droves, not only impressed by my skill, but curious about the woman who had stood her ground so publicly. My reputation, once tarnished by lies, became stronger than it had ever been. Daniel, Ethan's estranged cousin, remained by my side through it all. He was not a savior swooping in to fix me. I had already learned that no one could do that but me. Instead, he was a steady presence, someone who understood the weight of betrayal and the value of quiet loyalty. We spent time together, not in grand gestures, but in small, steady moments, coffee breaks between meetings, long conversations about family, laughter shared over memories that hurt less with time. There was something there, something new, but I didn't rush it. For the first time in years, I wasn't desperate to fill the emptiness someone else had left. I was whole on my own. Ethan, Clara, Margaret, and Lydia faded into the background of my story. Their names appeared in headlines, their scandals spreading further than I could have ever orchestrated. But I didn't gloat. Their downfall was never my destination. It was simply the justice owed. What mattered most was that I had risen, not from their ashes, but from my own. There were nights I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling of my small but beautiful apartment, and feel the echo of that wedding day, the sting of humiliation, the heat of whispered laughter, the weight of being told to leave. And then the sharp, undeniable shift when the priest called my name, when truth shattered lies, when I chose to stand tall instead of disappear. That moment replayed in my mind not as a wound, but as a turning point, the instant I reclaimed myself. And so my story closed not with bitterness, but with strength. At that wedding, they told me to leave. But when the priest called my name, I didn't just stay, I took back everything they tried to steal from me.